Alex Evans is the co-executive director and head puppeteer of the historic Bob Baker Marionette Theater in Los Angeles. Since the 1960s, the Bob Baker Marionette Theater has been entertaining audiences throughout Southern California. I talked to Alex Evans about his puppetry career, his role at the theater, and a bit about the history of Bob Baker and the theater on this episode, the first episode of the 8th season of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Alex Evans, welcome to Under the Puppet. It is so great to have you here today.
Truly honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about your puppetry career and all the amazing work that you do at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, and also a little bit about Bob Baker and the history of the theater itself. But I will start, as I always do, by asking you personally, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
Yeah. So I grew up in England, and I feel like Thunderbirds and Red Scarlet, and even like Rosie and Jim, if anyone knows what that is, it was just all over children's TV. So it kind of was like everywhere at the time. But I am very embarrassed to say I remember when I was a 5-year-old kid, and my dad one Christmas gave me this like Thunderbird. It's retrospectively really cool. This like giant kind of their island that had spaceships and things that come up. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh man, this is, puppets, like marionettes, like this is like a lame gift. Like I was a terrible, spoiled little kid. So I wouldn't say any of those moments with like puppets was like really affecting. I think when I was 19, I went to see the Bob Baker Marionette Theater puppet show for the first time, and truly was looking for like special effects, and Bob had come up in all the work he's done in movies, and Googled Los Angeles puppets, and went to go see a show and was just spellbound. And that was the moment that, essentially changed my life, where I was like, oh, this is what you can do with puppets. This is like, I don't know, this is like this, it just, everything made sense. It was like the whole combination of storytelling and engineering and performance and interacting with a community and a crowd, and let alone all the other important parts of the institution that is Bob Baker. So like that was 2007. That was the moment that I became a puppet person.
That's when you joined the cult.
Yeah. God, the burn hurt.
Growing up, was there any sort of desire to perform? Like, did you have any of this inclination to perform, or did you study theater when you were growing up?
No, so to this day, my mom is like shocked that I'm doing this like public facing thing. It's I was the shyest, like painfully shy, would run away from any type of theater, or like even like pep rallies. I remember kind of getting in a lot of trouble for like skipping school because I just didn't want to be involved in anything that was putting myself out there, if you will. And my impulse to get into puppetry or performance was never kind of connected to that, at least in the sense of stories I hear from other people who are just kind of driven to kind of perform. I think it was, so I think like I was very into like film and animation and things like that, and the whole behind the scenes nature of everything. And I think like puppetry or performing at the theater, it forced me to like kind of overcome that. And I'm so, in terms of like this psychoanalysis, like growth, like I grew with the theater. It really kind of opened the world to me to be like probably a better person socially.
Well, and you mentioned that your mom was surprised at you doing this sort of, public performance type thing. Did you come from a creative family? Was your family creative at all?
Kind of like my, like in a way where like spectacular birthday cakes kind of existed in my house, but like, not in any people with acting backgrounds. My uncle was in Frankenstein Frankenstein's Baby, I want to say is the name of the band, some like English band that toured with the Smiths ever so briefly. So there was like a little bit of the music background. No is the short answer.
Now, of course, to kind of tell the story of the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, we have to talk a little bit about Bob Baker himself. And could you, for anyone who may not know, could you give sort of, your speech of who you say Bob Baker is when someone asks you about the theater and about his, who he was?
Yeah, totally. So Bob Baker is as close to Geppetto as you can, at least in my experience with Bob, where I came to the theater and Bob was kind of in his mid-80s and this truly surrounded by a life's work of kind of handmade objects and that he kind of brought to life and had this giant impact on a community. Bob spent his life making what is the Bob Baker Marionette Theater when he was 5 years old. He saw a puppet show in a department store in downtown Los Angeles, and then essentially was like so captivated at that moment, he went home, turned his garage into a puppet theater. By his pre-teens, was doing birthday parties for Liza Minnelli and the kind of Hollywood elite. He was probably a teenager, kind of doing commercial marionette toy line, kind of sold in department stores. In World War II, he did the camouflage division of Los Angeles, where he essentially covered kind of part of LA with camouflage in case the bombers came. And then from there, kind of went to work with George Powell on the Puppet Tunes. And then essentially like went out, kind of kept making puppets, kept doing things, like truly part of this golden age of marionettes in Los Angeles. And when 1963, Bob and Alton Wood and Tina Gainsborough opened the Bob Baker Marionette Theater in Echo Park, and kind of became this cultural institution, a literal Los Angeles cultural monument, number 958. That was the kind of hub for birthday parties, for field trips, also for the studio where they kind of made puppets of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and GI Blues for Elvis and so much more. And it's over 2,000 to 3,000 puppets. It's dozens of different shows. It's truly, I feel like I'm part of this memories, important kind of cultural kind of moments in the city and beyond, kind of because of this entity that Bob created.
Well, thank you. That is a wonderful tribute. And you mentioned that, kind of a pivotal moment for puppetry was seeing the first show at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater. Like, do you remember your first experience walking into the theater and seeing it for the first time?
Yeah, so it was, well, I'm not from Los Angeles, so this is probably my first week kind of in the city, and the old theater in Echo Park was like located underneath the kind of Beverly Bridge, which is this kind of crazy intersection of like 5 different streets meeting at once, and kind of very much tucked away as this kind of strange white building. And this was 2007, and so I had no idea what I was walking into. So it was just like, what is this like crazy place? And I kind of open the door, and then inside it's magic. Inside it is layers and layers of history and love and care and little details kind of left and right. The contrast of this stark reality outside to this fantasy inside, like I would even say more than the puppet show, that's what was like, oh wow, I gotta be part of this. It just set me up to be swept away.
And how did you first get involved with the theater? Was it that day? Did you go ask for a job?
Essentially, yeah. I Googled Los Angeles puppets, called up Richard Chula, kind of picked up the phone, and I said like, hey, like looking to do this like internship. And he said like, we don't really do that, but come on down. Came down, saw a show, and at the end of it met Bob, and kind of had to convince him to let me help out. He was like very much, I was explaining like, oh, I'm into stop motion and animation. He was like, you don't want to do that here. Like there's tons of other places to do that. Like I kind of had to tell Bob that, no, this place seems amazing. I really want to be involved. And then did. So over the, like, I think at that point it was probably like 3 months of kind of interning there. And I started out kind of working in Bob's library, digitizing music for Bob. It was kind of at that point being played off cassette tapes, and I was helping put it on CDs. But also the other thing that I'm so proud to be a part of the Bob Baker Marionette Theater is the community. So all the puppeteers there kind of like shockingly with open arms, kind of like just like let me in, like introduce me to all the puppets, all the shows, how they do things, what their life was like, and I was just fascinated. And like slowly, I think retrospectively, I probably think there's a lot of things they just didn't want to do as part of their job. They're like, oh, this crazy kid, like he could pick up this heavy puppet. But I don't want to dismiss, like, it genuinely was such a welcoming environment from a community of people that, like, I would say most of the people at the theater at the time, like, grew up in the neighborhood, were very much from people I wouldn't otherwise interact with. And the theater really, like, made me be way more open to, like, I was no longer surrounded by a bunch of like snobby film kids. It was like, oh, here's some like real people, and don't regret it for a day. I love all my snobby film kid friends. They're wonderful people, but but my bubble was small.
Yeah, I will totally agree with you. This is actually something I had for a question a little bit later on, but my very brief tenure there, I just worked for the course of one show. But I was really struck by it was a community, and everybody who worked there were like your best friends, and I was working there over the holidays and did the holiday show, but like there was a gift exchange and all the gifts were very well thought out. And like it was just there really is this wonderful sense of community that theater kind of nurtures.
Absolutely. It's overwhelming. And like often, like, as we've been like forced to kind of grow, and I think the kind of the value people get out of the job and the plays is this kind of love and sentimentality of the place, of each other. And it kind of, instead of it being a big paycheck, it's this huge amount of heart that the theater offers. And I definitely recognize the toxicness that kind of happens around things like that. But I do think there's such an incredible value as we've moved and kind of grown. It's been something that's been really important to the theater to kind of hold on to. Like, we obviously want to pay people more and more and more, but we want to kind of, but also never let this place feel like it's only a job.
Right. Well, you were interning or sort of working digitizing music. Can you talk about your first experience actually where someone put a marionette in your hand and kind of pushed you out on stage, or however that happened?
Yeah, I want to say it was so Charles Phoenix used to do like This Is Your Life kind of shows. So this like old Hollywood, like This Is Your Life, Ed McMahon or whoever it is. So Charles Phoenix was kind of hosting this kind of retrospective of Bob, and they were all rehearsing, and the Venusians, which are kind of like space creatures that currently are in a Halloween show, they essentially said, Alex, pick up this, you can do this. And it's like a wonderful, beautiful puppet that just kind of like essentially floats and swoops and sways. And I like totally butchered it. I think I stepped on it like 3 times doing it, and kind of was like shocked at like, okay, like this seems like a big deal of a show, and you just put me out there, and kind of went with it. And like, I think part of the success of that moment was a little bit of like, oh, there really isn't much, there's obviously a lot to it, but like the step to go from like, not being on stage to being on stage was a small step. And I think that was mind opening to me, being like, okay, like it doesn't make me good, but like I can pick up a puppet and kind of bounce this thing to the music to kind of, at the time, they really don't want to paint it being any better puppetry than that.
And when did you start taking on a little bit more responsibility at the theater?
Yeah, so, I mean, I really kind of gradually, I don't know if it's good or bad that there never was a moment of, hey, I'm like doing this. So when I started the theater, Bob was mid-80s, 2007, 2009. And so I was just from day one captivated, like loved it, wanted to help out, wanted to support in every way of helping out with the music or doing some of the promotional stuff or, being part of the shows. And like in the theater, every Christmas we had at the theater felt like it was, in fact, it was even said like, maybe this is the last Christmas. Like, there's always this like fear of the theater like shutting down. So there was this ridiculous survival mode of like, okay, we got to do this thing now, otherwise you won't have the chance to do it, or like we got to fight for this place to survive, otherwise it truly felt like it could disappear. And so I essentially just looked for every way I could help out possible, and this kind of Bob being 85, this void of like things that Bob just no longer was able to do or didn't have the staff to do anymore. As Bob got older and older, the theater's like financial state got worse and worse. That void became bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just kept trying to fill that void. And then eventually Bob passed away, and after this kind of, I'll say, confusing transition, we became a nonprofit, and essentially became a nonprofit. And it's like, okay, nonprofits got to have executive directors, and then here I am.
Yeah, your title is co-executive director and head puppeteer, so you're kind of balancing a lot of things. But I guess for a marionette artist, that's comes with the territory. Is it sometimes hard to balance all those things, or have you pretty much nailed it down at this point where you can do both?
Yeah, it is always hard, and it's hard on every level, and it's necessary on every level. I think it's ridiculously hard, but I also think it's like also ridiculously fulfilling, and I never really look at it as being hard. Like, I think if I'm having a conversation kind of like out of body like this about it, it is a lot, but it is it's so fulfilling, and it's also, I kind of enjoy that I can get all stressed out over the accounting or taxes, and then be able to kind of go like, oh, where I gotta go like figure out how this like bunny's gonna hop out of this hat. Like it's a really, really nice like balance of being able to do different things. I'm never kind of like stuck. We're more and more trying to get organized and be kind of responsible and smart and kind of do this, and boy are their responsibilities. But I hope to always maintain a kind of healthy balance of like, if someone's just doing administration, they'll be a better administrator by understanding kind of the ingredients of the show, and vice versa. I think someone doing a show is a better performer if they really understand like, okay, this is like why we're doing this show, this is like how we're doing the show, this is like what, why we need to maximize 3 performers versus 5 performers, or here's this booking situation that kind of I feel it makes me better, kind of balancing all these things. Maybe that's just psychological justification to kind of keep doing it, but it is good. And I should say, I don't know when the best time to bring this up is, like, very much, I'm sure, like, I didn't grow up like puppeteering. Like, I learned everything at the theater. I know and have seen puppeteers that are far better than me. I fully recognize that my like role at the theater is as much an art as administrator as it is puppeteer or performer. Like, I think like that's something that like I, especially in the giant shoes that kind of exist here at the theater, is like, oh, I'm never going to be Bob Baker. I'm never going to make this kind of the art that Bob made. But what I can do is I can support the kind of artists around it to continue that shoe walking. I've lost the metaphor somewhere, but yeah, it is like, it's something I wanted to acknowledge to the other wonderful puppeteers you've had on this, that like, oh, like I don't know if I would, if the theater shut down tomorrow, I don't know if I would go out and get another puppeteering job, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, working under Bob, learning from him, did he give you any sort of puppetry advice that you still use or still practice today when you were learning?
So much. It's everything. And like I came to the theater, and I was like a film kid, and I was like, give me a month, I'll make a documentary. And I kind of filmed everything at the theater, and I'm constantly kind of going back to those like interviews with Bob for like advice and kind of like thoughts, and we use it throughout the theater all the time. I mean, it's everything from just the ways to walk, or the ways like a bridge music in a show should work. I think one of the hardest lessons to learn from Bob was like Bob was never a person to like pat you on the back and say good job. Like he just like wasn't interested in that. He was like perfectionist doesn't even begin to kind of cut it. Like I think he just was always dreaming of the bigger, the next thing. Of like if you nail one thing, it's like, oh well, add this layer, and what else has it become? It was Bob and this vision like is always pushing forward to more, and it's something that we kind of try to continue at the theater of that. Just what else can we do? What can we add? Like what, this thing, this performance is like a living kind of being, and maybe it's great today, but how different could it be tomorrow?
I love that. And it definitely shows in your work at the theater. Which some things we'll talk about here in a few minutes. I want to talk about the shows that you put on at the theater. How many different shows do you run at the theater during a year?
So on the main stage, like 5 like full productions. So that's kind of at the theater, but then we're like always doing special events. I would say about 4 a month, and that's everything from. We do a thing called Schoolhouse Rocks, where proceeds go towards field trips, but essentially it's like a band comes in, and then like puppets perform alongside. There's live reads that we do. There's screening events. There's variety shows that we do. So I want to say that in terms of programming, that's as much as like 30 different programmings happening inside the building throughout the year.
For those, like the big main stage shows, how long does it take to get a show up and running? How long do you take rehearsing and all that stuff?
Like we close the show on a Sunday and we'll open the new show Saturday, and then we have Monday doc day. So we like for the puppeteers on stage, there's like 4 days before the shows, but there's some caveats to that because it sounds crazy and it is kind of crazy. So much of the theater, and since my time at the theater it's oral traditions, like the older puppeteers teaching the new puppeteers like how these like routines kind of go. So it's rarely like ground up learn this thing like over a short amount of time. It's doing it. We just finished rehearsals and opened the show Magic Strings, and that was, I would say, 60% of things that were in recent memory. So we kind of just freshen up and kind of do it. And the other 40%, it is, or here's a routine that kind of is using these elements from different numbers. So like when we're kind of crafting the show, it's like, okay, we call it the cactus circle. It's the type of choreography that we do in this cactus number that we kind of be like, okay, the squirrels do the cactus circle, and then they do this figure 8, and then we're it's not ground up new things. Beginning this year and starting summer of 2025, that's the opening of like Choo Choo Review, the first like new production we've done since 1981, and that we're currently trying to figure out like how do we do that? Like that, 4 days of puppeteers picking up these brand new puppets for the first time isn't going to cut it. So we have to really kind of strategize it. And then just to can ramble a little more, that's the puppet part of it, the workshop and kind of fabrication team and the scenic people, they have more lead time. So like essentially we just opened Magic Strings, so we're talking about the stuff for the next show, Hooray LA, which opens about 2 months time. Things kind of just move a little bit on top of each other, and we like when I started the theater, there was probably like, I don't know, 3-5 people working at the theater. Like these days it's like 30 people. So there's like this kind of moving machine that's kind of always pushing certain things forward.
That's great. Yeah, I was. I had a question later on that if you look at the About page on your website, BobBakerMarionetteTheater.com, there's just like a huge list of people that work there, and I think people might be surprised just how many people from like you and your staff and the board and the puppeteers and the fabricators that it takes to actually keep the theater going.
Imagine how long the gift exchange lasts now.
Exactly. And I think it's, you mentioned kind of the thing you learned for Bob is what is the next thing, and now you have all these folks who are kind of focused on what is this next thing. So it's a pretty great community.
Yeah, it is like one of like when I started the theater, and when I started the theater, there was very much a sense of like place past its heyday. You could like very much see in the performances that were going on were like, this live moments of that were great and important, but like there was a little bit of an atmosphere of like, oh, the theater used to do these things or used to do things in this way. And feel incredibly proud of the whole team and the whole theater that it, at least from my perspective, finally feels like, okay, we're at the capacity when that heyday was, which I think part of it's this strange sense that it's a lot of it's in our imagination of kind of like, oh, we imagined in the 60s they were doing things these ways, and like, isn't that beautiful and romantic? And we kind of have like rebuilt the theater towards this romantic notion, and not quite sure exactly how much it is just like that. But I mean, for the first time in a long time, I feel like, okay, we could put on shows, make puppets, entertain an audience, have these movie contracts in the same way, same capacity that this vision that we have of kind of what this heyday was we're doing.
When somebody comes to you and they say, I want to be a puppeteer at the theater, what sort of skills do you look for someone to have before you'll take them on?
It's a good question. It's kind of a hard question to answer because I think, people have different skills. And I think that's kind of part of the charm of an ensemble is like you kind of want everyone to kind of bring different things to the table. I think intuition is like the biggest thing. I think you kind of want someone to a little bit be like self-learning, like people to be critical of themselves and to kind of like be able to make a mistake and then learn from it. And then also to kind of be like, okay, like these two people are moving over here, I'm going to move over there too. Like if that's what the choreography calls for. I think like that is the key to it. I mean, I think musical timing is like a huge thing given the style of performance that we do. I mean, sometimes it is like being, rambunctious or vocal or being a performer. We definitely need people that are very comfortable kind of going in front of an audience and kind of, making a character come to life. But that's the type of thing where I think like everybody doesn't need to do that. Like I think some people can be the mousiest, quietest person, but be the most get the most beautiful puppetry out from that place. So I think that's the type of thing that I think varies performer by performer. But I think intuition is the biggest thing. Perseverance is a lot of it. I think a lot of it's like kind of like learning a guitar. When at the beginning you're like, oh, my fingers like don't go there, but like you kind of just need to persevere until it just feels better, and you got to be okay with it not feeling right at the begining.
Well, I've interviewed several puppeteers on this show who cite working at the Bob Baker Theater as part of their puppet learning experience. And I know that when I was there, one like kind of cool moment, that there were several cool moments, but was when I recognized Eric Jacobson, who's one of the Muppet performers, coming in with his family. And it just shows how even from the puppeteer side, like it, as you said, it's a historical landmark and everyone in LA loves the theater, but also puppeteers come and they cite this as such an important place in just the history of puppetry as well.
Yeah, it's like overwhelming. You need to pinch yourself like often of the people that come see and kind of watch yourself. I mean, it's an honor, and like I think it's important for us at the theater to realize that we're kind of flame holders for this legacy. Like, there's on the one hand, there's the individual performance that people are coming to kind of see their kids, but on the other hand, it's this soaking up this kind of history, this legacy, the fact that people are seeing this puppet, that same puppet that was performed, at Disneyland's opening day is kind of, you can see that in a Nutcracker show. That's bigger than any single performance, and it's very special to kind of be performing for people that are otherwise idols to you.
Well, the theater boasts a cast of 2,000 to 3,000 puppets. On average, how many puppets are used in a show?
So we say 100, and that's sometimes true, sometimes not true. Like it kind of depends on the show. So Nutcracker has pretty much 100 puppets in it. I think Magic Strings, which is the current show we do, has maybe like 60 puppets in it, maybe even less actually. probably over 50 and like I would say 100 kind of tops. There's also these like silly like questions that we ask ourselves of like, what do you count as a puppet? Like, yeah, we move this door prop on stage. Is that a puppet? Or is like this puppet has like 3 characters in one thing? Like I am sure we could inflate that number to we could shrink that number, inflate that number like very far beyond the 2,000 to 3,000. So a lot of puppets that are used, like beautiful works of art that have 10 seconds of stage time. So yeah, there's a lot of things.
And I know you get this one a lot, but I have to ask it. It's legally I'm obligated. Who are some of your favorite puppets that from the collection?
I sincerely mean that it's like almost impossible to choose. Like it's like I don't have any children, but I imagine is what people say of like picking your favorite kid is that they all are special in different ways, which sounds so woo-woo and silly. But it's Demetrius Nova Twinklestar III, who's our like demi-star character, who like, I just adore the design. It swoops throughout the theater. Demi's is incredible. We have a tap dancing frog that we just restored. That is just a really fun number to do, and always just the routine is just it's just perfect. It's just set up in a way that a frog kind of sings Harvest Moon and then goes into a tap dance, and it like you have to do that number pretty poorly not to get a great crowd response. Jack Frost is a great puppet to do, but I mean it's like there's like seasonally like we put away Halloween puppets, but there's ask me in October and I'll probably say Frankenstein, but I genuinely can say I don't have a favorite because there's so many that are wonderful.
Yeah, well, and you have so many to choose from, certainly, as well. You could have a favorite for every day of 10 years.
That's a good I should yeah. I like that. But people used to joke. They used to say like, "Oh, Bob only had a theater to support his puppet making habit. Like he just liked making puppets."
Yeah, well, that's a place to house them and perform them, so it's perfect. Now, a big part of any show at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater is the ice cream afterwards. Can you talk about a little how that tradition started and sort of how it continues to today?
Yeah, well, it's a surprise. You're not supposed to know about it until the end of the show. It's okay. I want to say it's from day one. So there's like essentially in the old theater, we had to move in 2018 through a long story. But essentially in the old theater, there was like this separate room. So you'd do the show, say surprise ice cream. And at the end of it, you kind of go into this like parlor space. And there's like beautifully decorated like patio where you would just go and have your post-show ice cream, talk about the show. In fact, originally what they would do would be half the audience would go get ice cream, half the audience would go do tours of the workshop. But I mean, it's such a like cute like button on top. I mean, so much I think of the theater or lesson I have from the theater is like the audience experience of the show and the feelings to it exist beyond, the curtain opening and closing for the puppets. It is end any show and say surprise ice cream. It just makes it that much more magical and sweet and special. And I think, and Bob was all about that of like, how do you kind of add to this specialness? I think, is it Andy Kaufman did the same thing with the cookies, or he took the,
yeah, he took everybody out for milk and cookies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's 100% a gimmick, and it's a great gimmick, and it will never die.
Well, spoiler alert to anybody who goes to the show. You mentioned this before, and I mean, when I sort of worked there, even in the brief time I was there was kind of this thing like this could be the last year of in the old location of the theater. And can you talking about the move, can you talk about when it became clear that, okay, the theater is going to have to move, and how did you go about finding the new location?
Yeah, I mean, like essentially from the moment I started the theater, and what even decades kind of before that, it was a struggle to have a theater. Like Bob famously said that like he moved into this place in Echo Park near downtown, and it was going to be this big urban renewal, and they kind of canceled it, so he was kind of like stuck kind of in this kind of nowhere part of town. I love Westlake, the area the theater's at, and it's wonderful, but like very much was supposed to have, like music center, big kind of urban developments around it, and they never happened. So almost from day one, the theater was like struggling to survive. And it got dire many times, and there was this sense of, I think multiple times there to the press, there was like, the theater's going to shut down, like save the theater. And it got to a point where, if you asked most people in Los Angeles, they would say Bob Baker Marionette Theater shut down ages ago. Like it's already, it's gone. But essentially through like mortgages, tax issues, yada, yada, yada. Wow, Bob, it's like the last year of Bob's life, he had to like sell the building, and it's actually his home. It was like his childhood home. Spent like a year looking for buyers of the building that would essentially keep the theater there and do something else with it. There was this like week period where Jack Black was going to buy the theater, and we were all like really excited. So everyone kind of tried really hard to kind of figure out the scenario that would work best. Ended up being this like real estate developer building this kind of high-rise apartments. Essentially brought the theater with the essentially arrangement that the theater could stay there until they started construction. And then after that, it was very ambiguous because we were this historic monument and like what that would look like and what that mean. I think to a large degree at the time, and all these things are so easier said retrospectively than in the moment. Nobody knew what to do or what was going on. And I think at the time, people were like, okay, Bob's about to turn 90. This deal kind of at least allows the theater to stay open while Bob's still alive. So deal goes through, Bob passes away. And then there's probably 2 years of us, like after Bob passes, figuring out like what the theater is without Bob Baker, which was like a kind of a fascinating, like hard time of like defining who we were kind of without the founder around. Eventually kind of figure it out and then kind of go, okay, well, we sold the building, so let's figure out like what's going on. And then at the start of it, it was kind of like, okay, adapting ourselves into this kind of apartment building kind of going. And boy, for me, it was like a master's class of historical preservation and how that works in the city and all that type of jazz. So like we're kind of pushing hard on that to like stay in that kind of location that we kind of cared about, like largely sentimentally from us being there. And it's like 2018, and I said essentially get the phone call from the developer, the landlord, who said, okay, I'm going to start construction. You guys got 6 months to kind of get out of there. So then kind of knew it was coming and had done, I don't know, organization became a nonprofit and blah, blah, blah. But like at that moment, as we started really kind of like, okay, let's look at this on paper, like it, and ended up looking like, okay, we're going to have to move into this like place that's like the size of a Starbucks. Like we have to make the current theater work there, and it just didn't make sense. Like our mantra was like, we're gonna keep the theater going, make it keep all this magic alive, as special as it's ever been, and just couldn't wrap our heads around like how we do that, kind of dwarfed by this kind of giant apartment building. So we, I want to say November of 2018, like said like, okay, we're moving. This is the last season. This is the last holidays at the theater, as you know it. But don't worry, we're gonna keep going. We have this like new place. We can't really lie to people. We didn't lie to people. I just said we lied to people. But we definitely painted a picture of like, okay, we have a plan. We know what we're gonna do. We're gonna celebrate this old place and kind of give it this like wonderful farewell. But don't worry, because we're going to land on our feet. But like, at the time, we were, looked around at all the buildings and only had X amount of dollars, which was not a lot to kind of move a theater. Just probably like 50 different places. So we did our last show at Bob Baker the day after Thanksgiving, 2018, which the theater opened the day after Thanksgiving on 1963, and then it lined up this like residency for Nutcracker at the Pasadena Playhouse, and this like children's museum, so that we had enough to kind of get going so we could like maintain this kind of momentum and presence. But really did not have much at all kind of locked down. And, we were debating, okay, do we like donate this stuff to the Getty for preservation? Do we, like what are our options here? And we found this theater, the York Theater in Highland Park, which is this like old like vaudeville theater, and they kind of had to like negotiate with like the landlords here of like how to afford this this place, that they were kind of very willing to kind of like work with us and kind of adapt that. And then by February, kind of had the lease signed, which like sunk up to when the programming we had planned they ran out. Part of the thing with like the money of everything is like we had no money to build out a space like you hear about places opening with this like $2 million like capital to kind of mount a stage or do this renovation, and we had like none of that. We had all of our money was like sunk into the security deposit and bureaucratic other things moving and what you name it. But what we had was this community. We had like 200 volunteers, and the staff included, because everyone was like, this was the moment. We just kind of hustled, and like we just opened as fast as we possibly could. We did our like soft opening in like May, or maybe it was June, I forget. But like maybe like 4 months after kind of getting keys to the building, and just did everything we could to just get it going. Our first show was like no carpet down. Like it looks like it's comedic how like much of a construction zone it looked like as we did our first show. But essentially that was our revenue source to kind of keep us afloat by doing shows. So we just kind of got open as fast as we could, and then did that, and then did our like grand opening like day after Thanksgiving, to be all sentimental about it, in November of 2019. It felt great, and then COVID happened, and then didn't feel great. But I mean, I will say, all of the work of kind of like fostering this community, and it truly fostering because the community's there. The community exists because of the magic that is Bob Baker, that no one person, Bob included, is not responsible for, but it's these magical experiences that Bob and the theater has made. Like essentially when COVID happened, and like the narrative was like so easy comparatively, when we had to say like, oh, we said we're moving and we're not moving, we said we're going to stay but we're not going to stay, and like all of this mumbo jumbo of kind of what was going to happen to the theater was like a big struggle. When COVID happened, the message was like easy. It was like, okay, it's COVID, like save the theater because this global pandemic. And like I think up until that moment we probably had raised like 15,000, 20,000 in kind of one chunk of time, and then COVID happened, and with that message, it was like within like 2 weeks, like this like a year's worth of rent, like $365,000, which was just this crazy outpouring of support, and we held on as long. It was a global pandemic, so when the moment came, we were like, okay, we need the community's help. It was this just gushing support of people. And in that moment, the silver lining of the COVID stuff, it was like 2 years to kind of finish some of that construction work, or the work that we kind of rushed to kind of open. So
now losing the theater is tough, because it was such 1963 till 2018. But were there any like advantages to moving to the new space? Like, was there anything like, oh, thank goodness we can do this now?
Yeah, like multiple, like so many advantages, more than we could predict. Like I was like petrified. I was probably the biggest advocate to like stay in the old space, and even when it was like shrinking down smaller and smaller, because I thought like, part of this value of the theater is like you have these grandparents who came as kids and brought their kids, and this like definition of tradition and culture. Like I was scared people would go to the new theater and be like, well, this new theater is nice, but I went to the old theater. I think it's different memory. But the new theater, like it was like shocking. There was like it was just a moment where we were moving, and we took everything. We took out the drywall. We pulled the carpet back. We collected the asbestos. Oh, no, not really. But we did we actually have jars. We went through different like fixtures, and like Miguel kind of went around and kind of put like the dust from, the coffee can light, the dust from the chandelier. We have jars in the office of like all the dust from the different places of the old theater. But there was a moment when the old theater was clearly just like the old theater and just like not alive, and then come to the new theater and it's just energy, life. There's just momentum there. It's kind of, because we didn't hire contractors to do stuff, it was all made by volunteers and this like places of like love and care. It just so quickly and so surprisingly felt like the old space. It felt like Bob Baker Marionette Theater in a way that I was very surprised by. And I think, yeah, that was great. And also this vaudeville theater, we thought we were going to move and like lose 60 years of history of this building that we once were in, but instead it kind of felt like, oh, we moved, we're able to maintain these like kind of visions of the old space, and then also add on 100 years of history from this cool old vaudeville theater. So that was really nice from a historical theater perspective to kind of collect and kind of maintain. And then the community here on York Boulevard, like it is great. Like I painted that picture of kind of the old theater existing kind of with not much surrounding it in terms of like neighbors and other businesses, but like we're on like a high street, Highland Park. We're friends with the neighbors, whereas the neighbors like supported us kind of in the move. It felt like a community in a way the old theater did. And then in the last like surprising positive of the new theater is like the old theater had such history and tradition. We would literally take down decorations and change things, and kind of like people would cry of like, oh, you can't touch this, or this thing's been there for like decades, and everything was this like sacrilege potential for change. And the new theater, because like we essentially kind of built it all ourselves, it's so empowering of like, okay, we're going to mount this new show, need to knock down this wall or do this thing, or nothing's really precious anymore. It 100% is, but it's we feel very liberated to be like, okay, we want to do this crazy thing, we can do it. We don't need to kind of deal with this gray sanctimony of history. And I don't want to sound like disrespectful. We obviously treasure and preserve the history of everything here, but I think the kind of creative energy kind of needs that ability to kind of like knock a wall down and be okay with it.
Well, and it's the theater is more than just a building.
Yes.
It's the theater is the living thing inside the building, and the living thing can change and keep living.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of supporting the theater and people supporting it, I love you have just on the website, which we'll have a link to in the show notes. You have just a lot of fun merchandise, including ViewMaster reels that I saw today, that are just so much fun. But two things I wanted to talk about that I just thought were great is you have an Adopt a Puppet program. So if you can talk a little bit about that, but then you also have a Name a Spoon program as well that ties in with that spoiler alert ice cream. Can you talk about those ways that people can support the theater?
Yeah, so the Adopt the Puppet is it's essentially $50. You get a certificate that kind of has like a written letter from a puppet to you saying thank you for adopting it, and it's like this little like, I don't know, like pretty photo and a pretty certificate of like, I've adopted the baby seal. And then essentially anytime you come to the theater, you can visit your adopted puppet and kind of say hi. Sometimes people come and be like, I adopted this thing, I can take it home, right? And we're like, not really. But it's a very sweet like gift in a way to kind of like personalize that kind of experience of support. So really fun. And then we have so many puppets. It's great. A very good, not gimmick. I don't want to undersell it, but it's a sweet kind of like gift or gesture. And then name a spoon. So like we have this like donor recognition wall, and essentially we have these wooden kind of ice cream spoons. So kind of mounted in our kind of party parlors where you have ice cream. There's a display where your name for the rest of time can live on in the wall, kind of engraved into a wooden ice cream spoon. That we scratched our brain for a while of like how to make it not feel like a first grade like classroom like wooden spoon project, and how to make it like you think about like museums and their donor recognition, it's all like grandeur and like prettiness is a kind of like requisite for it, but really satisfied of this like of this kind of mural, if you will, of ice cream spoons and a way to recognize the people that like we would not exist without, and then people to also be able to come to the theater and be like, there's my name, and I want to say it's $250. If you're a big spender, you can get your name on the back of one of our ice cream chairs. But I also should shout out Bob. So More York is like art studio, for lack of a better word, but essentially retired like Hollywood set designers and Disney art directors. They kind of retired and kind of opened this kind of art space, and like we moved in, and they've been, specifically Bob Breen is like anything pretty in the building that you come in and see is 90% Bob Breen is responsible for this scenic painting. It's this world-class just job that's this sweet old gentleman has like painted, and all pro bono. It's like we have this amazing like artist, and I bring that up now because he helped design the kind of layout of this ice cream spoon wall. But shout out Bob Breen. Yeah, buy a spoon.
So, as co-executive director and head puppeteer, what is your vision for the Bob Baker Marionette Theater in the future? Now that you have this home, where do you see the future of?
That is so funny you ask. We were literally just crafting this like vision statement thing yesterday. I guess two things. So there's like we have this home, but we're like renting this home. We don't own the building. So essentially like this permanent Bob Baker Marionette Theater that I or anybody here could get hit by a bus, hopefully not, but the theater could live on for our grandkids. Like that's still the kind of like paramount kind of goal for us, for this kind of preserve this thing that we all love. And so that's like in the next 6 years of us kind of buying this building, or God forbid even like moving, but essentially kind of the goal being like, okay, we want to kind of set this up in a way that, no matter what happens with the economy or with, I don't know what it is, but essentially this kind of locks down the theater for a long time. So there's still kind of steps to go to kind of get there, but that's in the very, very near horizon. And then we start next year, we start the beginning of a new puppet show. We're like beginning development right now. And essentially, so I would say there's a generation that we collected as much information as we could from, or learned from, or kind of worked with as much as possible, but like we weren't in the state of making things like we are now when they were still with us. Bob included, John Leland and costume designers, and all of this heyday of Bob Baker. And I'm listening out the people that like I have experience with, but there's even a generation before that of King Hall and Roy Raymond and wonderful, wonderful puppet artists. And so the goal in making this new show is not only to make a like show that holds on and preserves the Bob Baker charm, but is like a contemporary, inclusive, beautiful show, but also to kind of, instead of like preserving this past, but it kind of can offer continuity to, okay, someone can learn making a puppet or how to perform here, as we do it. So we're no longer kind of like investigating like, oh, I guess they made this juggling clown this way. Like there is this kind of active production happening that would be done in no small part for the reason of just continuing that art form. And then, not to say, I mean, this podcast is a great example of so many people doing it in so many ways to learn it. But I think kind of for this hub that we have at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, I think kind of creating new things it's an important part of this living theater legacy that is very close to becoming a reality again. And I think we'll make this show, make another show, then we'll be permanent. I'll retire, and the theater will be around for my grandkids.
Now you have these wonderful shows that happen at the theater, and you have all these other, like as you mentioned, concerts and movie screenings. But the Bob Baker Marionette Theater also performs all over town. I've been able to see your show at Knott's Berry Farm several times, and you've done other performances. But one of your big things is Bob Baker Day. Can you talk a little bit about that and what Bob Baker Day is and when the next one is?
Yeah, it's so funny you asked. The Bob Baker Day, essentially, when Bob passed away, he didn't want to have a funeral, so we were like, okay, let's throw Bob a birthday party instead, and that was Bob Baker Day in 2015. This year is the 10th annual Bob Baker Day, and it's pretty much since when it started, it was just a day of free shows. And then next year was like a block party, and then it kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's like a 25,000 person carnival that happens at LA State Historic Park, which is kind of by Chinatown in downtown LA. And it's really just a day to kind of celebrate Bob Baker and whatever that means to you, whether that means imagination, whether that means puppets, whatever that means community or Los Angeles. It's like, it's just a day of free fun where there's nonstop kind of puppet shows happening, kind of walk around entertainment, activity booths, puppet making. There's like a variety stage. This year's there's like a Hooray LA Village, which is this kind of focused kind of celebration of Los Angeles, its roots, the LA River, and all of its beautiful things. There's like Bob Baker or puppet themed products or merchandise, or if you will. It's a free festival that it really is just inviting the community to come and kind of have a great time and share the love of Bob Baker, and it's great. It's like a giant thing that's grown way beyond what anyone could have imagined, and it's on April 21st, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and that's Bob Baker Day.
And I want to ask you, I'll slip this question in as well. I heard another interview you did where you were talking about a possible plan for the Olympics when the Olympics are in LA. To maybe having some sort of puppet Olympics.
So this is a dream for sure, and it's like essentially, yeah, like when the Olympics come in 2028 to LA, like kind of inviting different kind of puppet artists kind of over the world to do this Olympic kind of show. And I think I'm so excited for the potential for the many ways that could look and probably will look, where it would be hosting a bunch of like visiting artists that kind of come and perform, but then also kind of creating, I don't know, I totally have not articulated this in my head of kind of what this needs to look like, but it could be one production where you kind of invite, like you do in like a swim race, and you invite, I don't know, the Salzburg marionettes to kind of make a swimmer, and then that's like from Belgium, and then you invite I don't know, a French puppet theater to make a swimmer, and then like the puppets kind of compete against each other. Don't know how the competition works, don't know anything besides like, oh man, Olympics of Puppetry 2028 LA, this would be perfect. Like, I'm so excited. It's the type of thing I love about the theater, like that will kind of like crystallize with conversations like this, or like people kind of reaching out and being like, oh, we could do this, or we could do this, or blah blah blah, and then it will become something magical, I'm sure, and the world will love it, and hopefully it'll do less damage to the world than the real Olympics.
Excellent. Well, Alex, I always like to end every interview by asking, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Every day is filled with a different highlight. And I I mean, there's like showy, flashy things of like making a puppet of Harry Styles or Kendrick Lamar, or all these things that were like really fun. Or like we're doing those like that Sewer Boys, the Dix the Musical movie that came out last year, and like Nathan Lane, like bird fed the puppet I was doing. Like, so having Nathan Lane kind of bird feed me was a highlight. I mean, honestly, like those are the kind of like showy things, but I think there's like shows that it's just little kids that just love it, and you kind of see their expression that is the same expression that 1,000 other little kids have had or shared, and like that happened years ago. Like that's so fulfilling. There's like did this one show with this like school for the blind, and like we would kind of describe the puppets as they felt them. So and like they just had all these like emotional reactions to kind of like this is what's going on, and it was just this very like painfully heartwarming moment of like without being able to see it, these kids kind of experiencing it. There's a lot of sappy moments like that, but like, we do like I don't know 10 shows a week, and like every show is filled with some type of highlight, and I think I would be amiss to call one out above the others because they're all special.
Well, Alex, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today and being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure, an honor.
Many thanks to Alex Evans for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 93, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Alex Evans, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. I would like to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, and Ricky Chavez. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. As noted at the beginning of this episode marks the beginning of the 8th season of Under the Puppet. I would like to take a moment to thank all the amazing guests who've come on the show over that time. I'd like to thank my editor, Steven Staver, for always making these episodes sound the very best that they can. And I would like to thank you for listening, downloading, and spreading the word. We've got no plans to slow down now, so we thank you for being part of the show. And speaking of being part of the show, if you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604 or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2024 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.